This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Lime Illustrations. If you love quirky, colorful art transformed into fun, handmade stationery items, pretty much guaranteed to brighten somebody's day, that's just what you'll find in my new online shop at finelimeillustrations.com. That's fine as in I'm fine, lime as in the fruit, illustrations.com. Browse the entire collection or sign up for my email list to see some behind-the-scenes peeks into my studio. You'll also get first notice of new product launches and subscriber-only sales. And as an added little bonus, you'll also receive a free coloring sheet to help you relax and de-stress from your day. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I am your host, Melissa, and this week my guest is photographer Michele Mateus, and we are going to be talking about not just Michelle's journey as a creative professional, but also why it's so important for us as creatives to step into the camera frame and show the world the creator behind the work. So I am really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show, Michele.
Oh, thanks for having me. I smiled so big when you said that. I just love this topic so much.
I am really looking forward to this. And we were just talking before we came on air, but one of the perks of being a podcast host and producer is that occasionally I get to indulge in things that I really want to talk about. And every season, I usually have one or two themes that sort of run underneath all the episodes. I don't usually announce them, but this year I thought I would mention one of them. And that is this idea that as working creatives and as women, we have a rather hard time allowing ourselves to show up as our true selves. And I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, everything from mindset and fear to age to social conditioning, lots of reasons, but it's one of the things that I really wanted to get into. So when Michele suggested this as a topic for this episode, I was all over it, and I'm really looking forward to diving into it. But before we do that, for those of you who may not be familiar with Michele, let's just give you a brief introduction into who she is. She is an award-winning photographer, a mother, a woman living with multiple sclerosis, a coach, and an unstoppable badass. She's an introverted extrovert and an empathetic Pisces to the T. She loves bright lipstick, F words. So for those of you listening, be prepared, and karaoke. Connecting folks to their sensual feminine energy is what she lives for, and she is dedicated to raising vibes, smashing beauty standards, and starting fires through her work. And I love that. We should all be starting a few more fires through our work. So, Michele, the first question I ask everyone who comes on the show is, did you feel like you were creative as a kid growing up?
No.
Oh, okay. This is my favorite question. I always have a bet with myself.
I didn't. I mean, yeah, no, I didn't feel creative. I don't think it was encouraged. It wasn't discouraged in my home. You know, I know that sometimes it can be discouraged, like art isn't taken seriously, but my son right now, he's 8 years old or 9 years old. He's in musical theater camp right this week. And I remember as a kid, I so desperately wanted to do things like that. I also grew up in a very small community where I don't even know if there was musical theater camp, but I have immigrant parents. I immigrated from Brazil when I was 3, and my parents, were very low income growing up, and my dad was all about sport. He really had this idea that like sport was your ticket to ride, So I played a lot of soccer as a kid. I always say that when I was 16, I broke my ankle in a soccer game. It was the best day of my life. Because while I loved the community aspect of soccer, I just didn't like playing soccer, even though I was good at it. So I think I always wanted to try things. And part of the reason was access. Probably it wasn't even around financial access. And therefore, I didn't even explore it on my own because I was so focused on, academics and sport, which was not my favorite thing. Yeah. So no, I don't think I ever saw myself as a creative
It's such
for a
an
long
interesting
time.
question because I always have a little bet with myself as to how each guest is going to answer. I lost today.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah. You thought I was going to say, well,
So, but it's always
I,
interesting to see how people view it as they grew up. But so as somebody who didn't particularly feel creative or wasn't brought up in that kind of environment, um, how did you how did you find your way to photography?
well, it's interesting, even as I'm listening to you and I'm yeah, reflecting on what I just said. Like my dad had a dark room in our house growing up as a kid,
Mm.
and I still have those photos that he would create. So it's funny that that wasn't available to us or encouraged to us, like to be creatives, because my dad did do that kind of stuff. Now, I don't have the best relationship with him now, but I suspect that that did plant a seed, even though I didn't know. And I do remember as a kid going in the dark room, which was our laundry room, and putting the paper in. If anyone's ever done film photography, and the magic of putting the paper in and in those liquids, like please don't touch your eyes with your hands. You might burn yourself, and seeing that magic and hanging up the prints. And like I said, I still have them. So I suspect there was that element of like, okay, the seed was planted. Um, and then through high school, maybe it was a bit more academic, but I was really involved in the yearbook. I was actually the photographer for a yearbook. So I don't know. How did I even forget that? I'm just thinking about it now, actually. So, but I don't know if I ever identified as a creative. I was more like, and for a long time I wanted to be a journalist. And again, I didn't
Hmm.
identify that as being creative. I identified that as like wanting to tell stories. And I somehow didn't, even reflecting on that now, didn't think of it as creative, but more academic, like more like
Hmm.
I'm going to get in there and I'm going to tell the story, because I was and I still am a little social justice warrior. So I just wanted to, you know, tell all the truths and bring down the patriarchy kind of thing, even at a young age. So I suspect with that, over time, then I started to connect with my creativity through photography, because I always had a camera in my hand. But again, it was more like a documenting type of thing, not I'm a creative. I also think it's a big word to own, especially when calling yourself an artist. So when my mom passed away, she passed away from breast cancer. It was like very fast and furious. She died within 9 months. And I had always been curious about photography and wanting to take courses. So I took the little bit of inheritance that I had from her, which wasn't very much. And I bought my first camera, which is a Canon Rebel. It was the first year it came out. Digital camera was a big deal.
That was a
Because
big deal, yeah.
before that, I had a film camera, and I actually still have that film camera. So it's kind of funny as I'm thinking, I'm like, God, I've always had cameras, but I still didn't identify as a creative. And then I started taking courses. And for me, my journey into photography really was about therapy. It was because I have always been seen as such an extrovert. And in many ways I am, but I started to also recognize like I'm actually an introverted extrovert. I actually like being by myself. I was grieving. And so for me, the camera was just a friend.
Hmm.
I walked around. I love to travel. I lived pretty close to downtown Vancouver, and I love the like contrast of brokenness with beauty. So I would walk around really kind of sketchy areas sometimes with my camera and just take pictures of random things. And I was always just looking. And so it became for me like this art of really seeing and looking and being present with myself and my feelings. And then it kind of grew from there, taking more courses. Then I went to Emily Carr and did design. Again, I don't think I still saw myself as a creative, because I still saw myself as being uh I don't know, wanting a skill, because I always worked in nonprofits before. I did community development for about 20 years. I went back to school for design to enhance what I was doing in my other work. And then when I became a photographer and had my business, it took me about 5 years before I could honestly say confidently, like, I'm an artist. I also worked in the arts, even though I wasn't an artist, I was more in administration and community development type of work. And there's a lot of like, I don't know. The arts is an interesting place. It can be very exclusive in and of itself, you know? So it's funny that we want to invite people into the arts, but we also have exclusive language. And as kind of an outsider, because I was more of an administrator, I was like, okay. So I felt like once I started this business, how do I own this? Like, what am I? And anyway, I just started to call myself an artist and a creative, and it started to feel really good because we can identify that in so many ways, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a kind of a journey to even think about it like that versus being like, I have a skill set.
Yes. It's so interesting how people view that word creative,
Mm-hmm.
and how they either identify with it or they don't, or they're not sure, or they don't feel confident calling themselves an artist. That's a big one that you mentioned there that I think a lot of us
Yeah.
struggle with. So yeah. How did you go from starting out as a photographer? We actually haven't mentioned the fact that you are an intimate portrait photographer. You do some boudoir work, but you also, a lot of what you do is about allowing women to show who they are, show their strength, show their power. How did you fall into that line of photography?
Yeah. Well, I started my photography journey, as I said, just kind of walking around the streets, I
Mhm.
loved street photography, Cartier-Bresson, like who is like the father of street photography. I just loved all that work and was just, yeah, consuming all of that, the library books for my friend. And then I was like, oh, I can't get paid to do this. Are you crazy? What? And then I decided that I would try, because I had a design business. I had a full-time job. I worked for the city of Vancouver, but I also had a design business as a little bit of a side hustle because I went to my car to add the skill set, went back to the same work I was doing, and thought I would dabble in seeing if I could get more creative on my side. And then people started asking me, like, hey, you're designing my annual report. Can you also take our photos? And I was like, because I had a blog, but it was like a travel blog with all my photos. And it was just back in the blog days when people were doing lots of that kind of,
Yep.
using Flickr, that
Flickr,
kind of stuff.
yes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I was really active doing that. But again, it was more travel and street photography. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll try because people would ask because they knew that that was my hobby. And so it kind of started a bit that way. And I started doing brown photography before knowing it was a thing. And
Did
then
you
I
just
got
call it brown photography?
brand, or like
Brand
brand,
photography. I was like, I've
yeah,
never
yeah,
heard of
or
brand
like personal
photography.
brand photography,
Brand
yeah,
photography. Got it. Sorry.
yeah, brand. That's okay. And then I kind of got sucked into weddings because I was curious about just working in those environments. When I worked for the city, I had a job where we ran large scale community events. So events didn't
Mm.
scare me. Weddings actually, when people know I shot weddings, they'd be like, "Ugh, like what was that like?" And I was like, it was fine. Like I liked it. I did for 5 years. I shot like a lot of weddings. And it was kind of through that process. Like I was shooting like personal brand photography. I was shooting weddings. I did families and different things like that. Um, but because of my MS, multiple sclerosis, it's hard on my body to
Mm.
carry all my stuff everywhere I go. And I was exhausted. And I just started to really reflect on like what was my purpose, what was my intention. And I just kept coming back to, oh, I just looked over on the wall and I have a picture of my mom right there. I just kept coming back to like thinking about why did I originally start really connecting with my camera, which was through my mom
Mhm.
and her passing. And then thinking about her life. And my father was not, I mean, I'm sure he did the best with what he could, but he wasn't the most kind person to her. And there's definitely all kinds of trauma in my background. Um, and I really start to feel like, I wish I had a beautiful portrait of her. You know,
Mm.
I have some crappy photos. I have like two or three that I actually really like. So I really wish that I had that. So I wanted to give that to people. And then I really wished that I could offer something to people so that they could connect with their beauty, with their strength, that they have so much life and joy within them, even when they're living under these situations that may not be ideal. And that's where I started to find boudoir.
Mm.
And even boudoir, that term didn't really align with me, but I went with it. And there's so many different ways you can be a boudoir photographer. There's so many different styles, which is why I often say that I do intimate portraiture,
Mhm.
except nobody Googles that. So you gotta like roll with the status quo. But I think it was like really that desire of wishing to give others what I wish I could have given her.
Mm. Yeah. That is when I was prepping for this interview, I kept going back to something I read online. I can't remember if it was in a Facebook group or something, where a young man who had lost his mom, and she wasn't in any of the family photos because she was always worried
Mm,
about her weight. And he's like, I
mhm.
just wish I had a photo of her. And I don't remember where the conversation came from, but I always wonder how many of us try to avoid the camera because there's some aspect of ourselves that we're not comfortable with. And we don't realize the people who love us, how much they just wish they had that photo or a couple of
Totally.
photos.
Totally.
So,
I used to make a lot of people cry. I still make a lot of people cry. It's a thing. Just like because I'm very open and vulnerable and honest, but I would say like, so I used to do family photos. And even when I
mhm.
used to shoot weddings, I would tell people that were the mothers, like get in the frame, get in the frame. And I would sometimes have to stop and be like, listen, somebody's going to look for these photos one day. And I know because I'm not somebody.
Yeah, yeah,
And it wasn't, to create that guilt or shame. It was just like, nobody cares.
they
Nobody
don't.
care. Like,
The
right.
people who
And,
love you do not care.
nobody cares. I mean, it's so fascinating that we photograph our children endlessly and
Hmm.
ourselves with our children when they're little babies, right? And then all of a sudden it stops.
Hmm.
And so why did we think that the children were worthy of being in the photos, but as they got older, it even stops for them, and then we stop being with them? And to be honest, my baby photos are fine, but I would rather have the photos of my mom and I or family member like older, like where those memories are more fresh in my mind, or there was a special occasion where we could connect. And yeah, it's a thing where people just don't realize that. And unfortunately, like it's inevitable that we are going to pass and people are going to want to remember us. So why not leave this proud legacy rather
Hmm.
than hiding?
It, yes. I so for those of you listening, Michelle did an interview on CBC. I think it was the local CBC here in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Was it with Gloria Makarenko? And it's on your website. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But one of the things you mentioned in that interview was this 70-year-old woman who had been a professional dancer, I think,
Hmm.
and how she had no record of
Hmm.
herself as a dancer. And that just made me cry when I heard that. I was just like, that is just so wow. I just and I don't think we think of it that way, especially when we're younger. I think as we get older, it becomes something that sits with us a little bit more. But yeah, I have to imagine that. So I worked a bit as a photographer prior to going back into design, and I would rather shoot things than people.
There's a lot
um,
of people in that camp, so don't
yes.
worry.
I mainly did food, and I also did some street photography. I love doing graffiti and things like that. But I have to think from a psychological standpoint that the type of photography you do has to be in some ways one of the hardest forms of photography, but also it is probably one of the most rewarding, because I'm going to guess that even just picking up the phone or emailing you and asking to make this appointment to come for this kind of shoot has got to be something that a lot of people sit on for a very long time before they get up the courage to even do that, let alone show up at your door
Yes.
prepared
Hmm.
to.
Yes.
So what is that like for you, like in terms of what your work, the kind of environment that you're working with, and how you bring to life these women who come to work with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think because I worked in community development for so long, that created such an amazing foundation for how I am as a photographer. and how I am as an artist. And for me, my business is not transactional, and I'm very wholehearted about that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to have a business that's transactional and you make good money and whatever. But, when I first graduated university, my first job, so I have an undergrad in social justice and feminist theory. Surprise. Um, my first job was in a women's shelter in the UK. And I worked there for a couple of years. I worked for Women's Aid, and I've seen some stuff. I've heard some stories, not only there, but in my own life, in my own home. And so I think that by using those experiences and the knowledge that I gained in holding space for people there and how we supported people, I mean, I was a support worker, that is all kind of informed how I am as a photographer, because I didn't just come into this as a business. I really came into it as like wanting to be that space holder and that witness of people, just the same way I was in those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So now I just happen to have a camera in my hand. So a big part of that, and you're right, like a lot of people will reach out, they will ghost us because they probably get cold feet or whatever. And I think for me, it's that whole showing up, myself showing up as much as I can online to create that safety. The way that I write my emails, the way that my website is written. Now, I know that we say that people are busy and they don't take time to read things, but I actually find it really interesting that people that do book me, they'll be like, oh, I saw on your website that blah, like insert whatever about myself. And I'm like, wow, you read it? Yay. Because I think, for me, it's about connecting with that deeper message. Those are the people I also want to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've really tried to do that a lot with that communication piece, because it is stressful. It is nerve-wracking. And I think because of the way that I set up how I shoot people and my intention, I want to attract people with a similar intention, like, hey, I love sexy photos. I'll take those all day, every day. But I also love depth. I also love creating a story and that intention. And that's what I'm really inviting people to do, which, by the way, is terrifying, right? What? So I think that everything that I put out there online, I also have a really active newsletter. And even in that newsletter, I try not to just be like, book a shoot, buy my services. I try and just share more of myself and my own stories, the messy middle, all of it. I think for me, I don't know, but I feel like that's part of that invitation, that people will feel safe here.
I think that's so important. And it wasn't really in sort of where we were going to go, but this is something that as business owners, because most of the people listening here, we're all creatives and we all create for a living, but we're also all business owners. And there is something really important about understanding who your potential customer is and what they need to feel connected to you so they make the purchase, book the shoot, do the thing that we want them ultimately to do. And so, on the one hand, you said your business isn't transactional. And I think most of us as creatives don't feel or don't want to feel like our businesses are transactional. But at the end of the day, we also need to earn a living. Mm-hmm. So it's this kind of tension, right?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And the money mindset, all of that. We could talk about that for hours. But so it is, you said sometimes you're surprised that people read what's on your website. And yet I'm not surprised, because I think if you are going to work with somebody who's going to take these intimate photos of you, there's got to be a huge trust factor there. Like, you're not just going to pick the first person who comes up on Google, right? You're going to go through those websites and make sure that this is somebody who you feel safe with before you sign up to do a shoot. So I think sometimes we don't always remember how important making that connection is. And I would think with what you do, it's probably massively important. So yeah, but once you get them in your studio, tell us a little bit about how it works, because I imagine it's got to be pretty incredible watching the transformation. I've looked through your portfolio. If you are listening, I really encourage you to go look through Michele's work on her website, because the images are very striking. And yes, some of them are sexy, but a lot of them are just about strength and freedom and all these other things that we kind of don't always allow ourselves to feel. So Yeah, what's it like bringing them into the studio and then seeing that transformation happen?
Yeah, I love that you just said freedom, because that's like one of my favorite things to try and bring out of people, that sense of freedom,
It
because I
comes
think we
across
just,
in your work.
oh, thank you. That means a lot. You know, when they get, so first of all, my studio is in my home,
Mhm.
and it's not in a busy downtown studio. And, for money mindset for a long time, I was like, oh, it's my home. It's like messy when you walk through my living room, and you have to walk by Legoland to get to my studio, and how embarrassing. And so I really had to overcome that, because at the end of the day, it's not about that. It's about what's in this space. And I have a small space. It's 300 square feet. And I make magic in here, and they get to walk through there. They have to walk through my kitchen. There might even be a sink full of dishes from the night before. And I always make little jokes about that. And I would say 90% of my clients are mothers. So they understand. And if they're not mothers, they're busy people. So they're like, oh, who cares? Because, I'll be like, I'll make jokes. I use humor a lot.
Mhm.
And then they come in here, and it's totally a contrast. There's not a lot of stuff in here. It's very minimalist. If I had my dream home, this is what it would look like, without all the Lego and all the things. And so they instantly feel relaxed. I usually have some, like, I love jazz. So I usually have some kind of like French coffee house jazz music playing. I always have a candle going. I have a sign with their name on it to welcome them. I have a gift. So like right away, it's kind of like, welcome. And everybody loves the sign with their name on it. They take a selfie with it, or they'll do a little Instagram video. And it's just right away that like warm, welcoming feeling. In the bathroom that they get to use, there's a candle in there. I put out toiletries that have feminine hygiene products. Like, I've kind of thought about all those little things
Mhm.
to just make them feel like, okay, I belong here. I'm welcome here. We have hair and makeup that sets up here. The hair and makeup artists that I work with are very friendly and kind and gentle as well. And we just try and make it just easy going. I offer them something to eat, drink. I always buy fresh fruit. I buy like those little containers from Safeway that are prepackaged, and I give it to them because I know they didn't eat breakfast, even though I told them to. So I bring that out. I have a tray of like granola bars and all kinds of different things to just like take a load off, sit down. And a lot of the times people are like, ooh, like I can see it in their body language,
Mhm.
because I'm pretty easygoing. I'm just like, it's fine. Like I can see that you're nervous. Tell me how you're feeling today. Um, and sometimes the waterworks even just come out of that, like what it took for them to get there. It's pretty amazing how open people will be. And I think that's a reflection of how open I've been with them as well. I always set an intention with my clients. I use like affirmation cards and get them to pull a card. So right away, it's
Love
just
that.
like really relaxing and fun. And the affirmation cards that I use, they're called the Super Attractor Deck by Gabrielle Bernstein. I have them right here. And I like these because they're not too woo-woo. Although I do like the woo-woo. But they're kind of neutral enough that they're just fun, and it's all about attracting amazing energy into your life. And actually, 1 month, 4 women pulled the same card. So I thought that was interesting.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think all those little touches, even down to how I've designed my space to just be having different textures. It's very neutral in here. I like white. I like everything to be neutral. But it is a small space. And so it can quickly feel crowded with their staff and my equipment and everything. But I think just having those kind of textures and that warmth and the candle going and the coffee going, it just creates that sense of home.
Mhm.
So right away, I feel like they just are able to melt a little bit into their chair as they're getting their hair and makeup done.
Do you think hair and makeup helps the calming process?
Yes,
Because there's something
100%.
about having somebody,
100%.
do your hair and it's,
Yes.
like going to the
Yes.
salon, right?
Totally. Yeah. I've had people ask me in the past, like, can I do my own hair and makeup? And I'm
Mhm.
like, I mean, you can, but it's going to be included regardless. So
Still
why not
enjoy
take
it.
advantage? Because
Yeah.
you learn from your mistakes. And a lot of people want to do their own hair and makeup, probably because they were a bridesmaid once and the hair and makeup artist did some crazy job on them that they didn't like, or they, they still have PTSD from their prom or something. I don't know. Like, I feel like everyone has had that experience. Um, they went to Sephora and they put too much on them. And I like, my style of photography is really like effortless and chic. I don't love overly done unless you want to, like, if you want to do that, sure, let's go for it. But the big reason for me is that I just want them to relax. And when they
Mhm.
sit in that chair, it gives them that time to be taken care of. And,
Yeah.
women find it hard to receive. And so it is about receiving that care. It's not so much, I've photographed people without hair and makeup on my own when I do creative shoots, because I also love really raw imagery. So I don't feel I need them to have hair and makeup to create beautiful, powerful images, but it's more about setting that tone,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, you asked about the transformations. I mean, at the end of their photo shoot, they're already, I would say 99.9% of my clients are already like, that was amazing. I feel amazing. I feel $1,000,000. I haven't even seen the photos, because you know why? They have been seen. They have been allowed to be themselves without shame or judgment. We're having fun. The music is bumping, or sometimes it's chill. I've done photo shoots to anything between classical music to country. I don't even like country, but I'll listen to it if you like it. To like hip hop, to whatever, like you name it, we'll do it, because I want to activate all your senses. And so often we are not activating all our senses. And that to me is what sensual living is, really, is like, how are we experiencing the world? So, I've got the sense going, I've got the sounds going. And they're like on cloud nine. They're like, oh my gosh, like sign me up. When can we do that again? Even though they were so nervous, not only about coming and being in front of a camera, but spending the money on themselves, investing the time in themselves, right? The time is such a big thing, more than the money often, right? And just like allowing themselves to be truly seen. But by the end, they're like, when can I come back? So that's like right a win. And then, I will say that a huge percentage of my clients, when they do come back and I walk through the photos with them, we look at them together, we go through them one by one. Most of my clients cry.
Yeah, I can see that. It's
They
got to be a
cry.
bit of a release to see those photos. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
They cry, they shriek, they're like, and even though they'll shriek and get excited, but then the tears will often follow, because they're often like, and I've said this so many times, a sentence that I've heard many, many times is, I'm still in there.
Yeah.
Or a
That's
variation
interesting.
of that. Yeah. Like I'm still in there. I still got it. What? Because they're so, I think we become so disconnected, so disembodied. We're just acting from our head, doing for everyone else.
Yeah.
And to see yourself reflected back at you. I mean, I don't manipulate my photos. So other than, converting to black and white and doing,
basic
the
editing.
editing.
Yeah, of course.
But I'm not nip and tucking, or that's totally against my ethics. So, to see yourself reflected back at you without being nipped and tucked and photoshopped like nobody's business, it's pretty powerful, because it's like, wow, someone sees me like this.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen myself like that in a long time. I need to allow myself to feel that way.
What is it that I guess gets people to pull the trigger to want to do a shoot like this? Like, is there an underlying theme? Is it something that's happened to them in their life, or like what makes them think like, this is something I think I need to do? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I get a lot of people who are celebrating milestone birthdays. So most of my clients are between the ages of 40 and 50, I'd say. And I think my oldest client was 72. So, I do get a lot of women who they're changing job, career. They recently divorced. That's another one. And it's interesting. A lot of my clients are single moms, like a lot of them, where they've put people in front of them for so long, and they're just kind of coming out of that fog, and they're like, fuck it. I deserve to be celebrated, and I want to connect with my sensuality for me. And I want to define that for myself, like they're just, and I often hear too, like, what was I worried about in my 20s and my 30s? I hear that so often. Like, why was I so worried in my 20s and my 30s? I hear that so often.
I wasted so much time worrying in my 20s and 30s.
Right? I hear that so often. And so I just like meet them with like just kindness. I'm like, okay, that's okay. We all have done that. You're here now. But I think that often it's a milestone. Sometimes people want to give a gift to their partner. which I don't market my business like that. It's really common in the boudoir industry to market, do this for your partner. And
Yeah.
I'm like, who cares about your partner? Do this for yourself. You maybe not even like I said, I have a lot of single mom clients that don't even have partners.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a partner to feel good about yourself. You don't need a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You just
Yeah.
need a purpose.
Yeah. Yes. So interesting. I was really looking forward to having to talking about all that, because it is fascinating to me what makes people want to do that. And I turned 50 last year. And so all my friends are we're all at that stage where we're hitting that half century
Yeah.
milestone. And it's like, I don't have kids, but most of my friends have kids, and they're all getting to that age where I think the youngest is out of my close friends is probably grade 12. So they're, university kind of there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're kind of coming out of the fog. Fog's
Yeah.
not really the great word to use for it, because it's not like they didn't enjoy being a mom or anything like
No.
that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's
The
just like
mist.
the mist. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And it's just suddenly realizing like, okay, there's time for me now. Like what do I do with this? Like, who am I? What do I want to do? Like, I have this free time that I didn't have before. I maybe don't want to have the career that I always had because it paid the bills really well. And now I have a little more freedom. And so it's all about kind of figuring out what's the next half century going to be like. And so I could see where doing something like this would be really appealing to a lot of them, just as sort of that marker milestone, like you said, of like, huh.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said, a lot of your clients say, oh, like, I'm still in there. I think when you sort of hit that point where your kids are leaving home and you have more time to think, because I think when you're a mom, you don't always have the time to just think about these things, but all of a sudden they have this time to think, and it's like, yeah, who am I? Like, am I still me, or is there somebody else in there that needs to come out? So yeah, really interesting. I wanted to go back to the 70-year-old woman who was a dancer who had no visual record of herself. And I think in this era of social media, Instagram selfies and being on TikTok and doing all those things, it's kind of hard for us to imagine the idea that we wouldn't have pictures of ourselves doing what we do. And yet I suspect that's a lot more common than we care to admit. Like, do you find that at all in the work that you do?
Well, I mean, I find that with myself, even. I'm a photographer who is lucky to have a lot of photographer friends that I can do fun play dates with. And I mean, I have hired photographers to take my photos, and I do play dates. But yes, I think that we're so often just in the doing. We're not in the
Mm-hmm.
being.
Mm-hmm.
We're not allowing ourselves to feel that important, that and worthy of being documented. So we're not
Mm-hmm.
saying, I mean, okay, I'll think about it. Even when I had my son, birth photography wasn't really a big thing. It was kind of, I didn't really know about it. And I remember even having my phone, and my husband had it. I'm like, give the phone to the doula. I had a doula, and she was like, what? And I'm like, in that moment, I was like, I
Yeah.
would love a photo of me like having my baby. It took me 4 years and 3 miscarriages to get pregnant. So it's like, okay, I would love this moment. And I mean, she didn't know what the heck to do. And, I think that's how we often are in life. We're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
someone should take a photo of this thing that's happening. That's important right now. And we
Yeah.
just forget.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened in her case. She had this one photo of younger, it was on her wall. I went to her house, so I saw it. And then another one that she was like, I don't really like. It was very jazz hands, staged, right? And she's a really great example of, she wore, a black t-shirt and black leggings. Like, it wasn't boudoir. And this is why I prefer that intimate portrait idea, but it's very intimate to come and allow yourself to be seen and witnessed,
Mm-hmm.
just even in that self. And I think that there's so many people like her that are just moving through, doing their thing, being really kick-ass at it, and just not having the opportunity. Because, even if there is an event photographer, that doesn't mean you get those photos,
No.
right? That doesn't mean they're yours
No.
and they're good quality enough to print and proudly put onto your wall. So she was 70. She wanted to leave a legacy. Now she doesn't have any grandchildren. She's hoping for them. But not sure if that's ever going to happen, she was saying. So, for her, she was really thinking about that at that stage in her life. And you're right. I think as we get older, we start to think about like, oh, and she's an artist, right? She's a creative, she's a dancer. It's like,
yeah, visual performer. Yeah. Like, and
yeah.
there's no visual record of that. And it, it it's I'm really into like family genealogy and stuff with
Okay.
my
Yeah.
family. So it's something that I do a lot as a hobby in the winters kind of thing. And when I stumble on a photograph that I haven't seen before, it's like gold.
I
It's like,
know, me too.
who
I
are
love
these
that.
people? Yeah, like, oh, do
Yeah.
the first time I saw a picture of my great grandparents, who died during the Holocaust. So I never met them, although they were young enough that I certainly should have met them. But I saw their wedding photo, and it was like
Aw.
1920, 1918, sort of in that era. And I, my great grandmother looked exactly like me. Like I had
Oh,
never seen anyone in my family who, like, I'd see resemblances and stuff, but never
yeah.
seen somebody who was like me reflected. And just being able to see that was so incredible. And weirdly, my great grandfather looked like my brother when he was younger. So that was a little
Wow.
weird, but it was like, wow, like, and so even though she might not have grandchildren, like, you never know who the person is that's going to find those photos and be like, oh
Well,
wow,
that's the thing.
yeah.
That and you know what? Another thing is too that I've always thought if I'm a total serial academic, if I ever went back to school and did like a master's, which I was partway through a master's and I quit to actually really lean into this business. But one thing I'd love to research is the impact of photos on adults. So they've done research with children, and psychologists have researched how hanging photos up in the family home make children feel.
Oh.
And yeah, so there's really if you could probably Google it, there's really interesting research around that it creates a sense of belonging. It
Mm-hmm.
creates a sense of importance. And like when their friends come over, they're like, look at this funny photo of me on the wall or whatever. And the research around that is really fascinating to read. And I don't think it stops at children.
No.
We go to art galleries, we admire art up on the walls of other people. We love to find these photos of other people. Imagine what kind of world it would be if we proudly hung up photos of ourselves and showed our children. So I have photos in my home of me and my husband on the wall a few places, and my son loves it. It's like, yeah, mom and dad might fight sometimes. Well, look at us, we're so cute too. We love each other. We really do. I think it's just creates that sense of confidence and that they can be like, yeah, look at
And
mom
yeah,
up
and
here on the wall,
connection.
or dad or brother or sister, or all of us together. We all have value. We all can like take up more space, and we all deserve to be seen. I
Mm-hmm.
think it sends such a huge, loud message. And it's really fascinating that they've studied that with children. There's also like research around when people with Alzheimer's see photos, and like they research, is it, oh my gosh, I'm so terrible at remembering these kind of things, but the brainwaves of like, same with music, like
Mm-hmm.
how it triggers, right? And like they start responding. So photos are important. History is important. And back to your digital comment, it's so interesting. I saw this workshop once. I attended a workshop once, and it was by the woman at UBC who's in the archive, does archiving there. And she was saying that even though we are creating more and more content by the minute, we are having less and less archives for
Printed
historical
record.
reasons.
Yes.
And that's sad,
It
because we're
is.
not
They
valuing, right? We're not valuing the print, the book, the whatever. And here's the
yeah.
thing, like when I first started photography, my wedding photos were on a CD-ROM, and there's no
Mm-hmm.
photos on there. They disappeared. The data disappeared. Poof, gone by. Then we moved to USB. Well, new computers don't even have USBs on them. Now we're moving to the cloud. Well, you don't own the cloud, but a photograph on your wall, you own forever,
Yeah.
and it never will
Yes.
change.
Yeah. How many millions, billions, trillions of photos are forgotten about because they're on a cloud
Yeah,
storage. They're
digital
on cloud storage.
clutter.
Yeah, they're just it's just noise because there's just so many of them. And
Yeah.
you get a new computer and you don't bother moving them over or whatever, right?
Your hard drive dies. I've had that
Yeah,
happen.
absolutely. So yeah, printing is so important. And I'm just yeah, just thinking about what we were just saying there has just made me think of a whole bunch of stuff with my family. And it's just so fascinating to me. All of this is like my dad had a traumatic brain injury about 13
Oh.
years ago. So he has no short-term memory. And so for him, photos of anything of the past, he
Mm.
loves. A friend of mine just published a book. She's actually a former guest on the show, Gabby Payton. She wrote a book called Where We Ate. And it's all about landmark Canadian restaurants from coast to coast. And my dad was in the Air Force, so he has been stationed all across Canada in very remote spots very often because he was a radar tech. And he has a hard time concentrating on anything because of his brain injury. And I showed him the book when it arrived, and it's full of photos from the 50s and 60s and
Oh.
70s of all these restaurants. And he sat there and he read it from cover to cover. And he was
Oh,
just
so
so
special.
absorbed in the photos. And I told Gabby, and she was just like, wow. And I said, I haven't seen him pick up a book in years. And yet the photos just drew him in. And he
Oh,
was so like, that's how
so
powerful it
powerful.
is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if we go back to my client, the 7-year-old, she wasn't looking for digital photos. I
Mhm.
think that some, especially in younger generations, and sometimes I get it, not very often, because I am very clear that I'm an artist and I'm creating for you to enjoy art, which is to me not a digital file.
Yes.
That's just data. That's not art. Um, I mean, I guess it can be art, but I want it to be more visceral.
Yes.
Um, she she didn't want that. She wasn't motivated by that. She wanted those prints for that intention.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a stage, I think, in photography for a while that people were like, just digital files, digital files. And it's like, well, no, I don't, I mean, you're going to get those, but you're also going to get this. And
Yeah.
I do feel anyway, the people that come to me, they're not even asking me that question. Like, yes, they get it. Yes, I want you to share and get that dopamine rush of like how you feel
Of
about,
course, there's a place for
right?
that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But I really want you to have these legacy portraits.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, one of the things that you did recently is you hosted and put on an exhibition called Fabulous Over 40, where you
Mm-hmm.
photographed a lot of women over the age of 40. So, thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's one of the things I'm really aware of now is like how women over 40 are viewed. And my dentist, I love my dentist, weird thing to say, but she always says, instead of saying as we get older, she always says to me, Melissa, as we get wiser. And I
Oh,
love that
yeah.
she reframes it that way. But yes, so you've got all these women who are full of wisdom, shall we say. And what prompted you to create that show?
Well, I'm 46 myself, but yeah, I think it's just that again, I'm just gonna like bring it all back to my mom, right? She never felt fabulous. She never felt amazing. And as I said in my interview with Gloria on CBC, that there was a photographer in the States that started really kind of talking about celebrating women over the age of 40, like we're not getting celebrated. Again,
Mhm.
it's the children, it's the families, but just the individual. What is going on? They're not being recognized. And I loved that concept. I also love F words, so fabulous.
It's a great F word.
um, and for me, again, it was really about wanting to tell those stories. So when I photograph women, and especially for that project, I would interview them and I would send them questions, about 20 questions in a questionnaire, and then say, like, pick your favorite 5. If there's one that doesn't resonate with you, like free flow it, because I wanted to be able to tell people stories through their own words, not mine.
Mhm.
And of course, it's my lens, and I'm in some ways manipulating what I not manipulating it through Photoshop, but just like I'm showing them what I see.
Mhm.
So I wanted them to have that opportunity to share whatever they wanted to share, about aging, about their experience, about being in a female body, all of that kind of stuff. And it was really powerful. It was really cool.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm glad that more people are doing that. I do think as you get older, there's sort of this cloak of invisibility that we sort of wear.
Totally.
And there's a lot of power in being invisible sometimes, but at the same time, you start to feel like you're not being heard the way that you were when you were younger. So it's a weird space to be in, kind of figuring out how to show up.
But you gotta want to show up too.
Exactly.
Right?
So let's talk about that. So, one of the reasons I brought up the woman who was 70 who didn't have the images of herself as a dancer is because I think this is a very common theme amongst creatives. We focus on our art, the thing that we create, and whatever that may be, painting, visual performance, all the different things that make up what creativity is. We like that to sit in the spotlight, and the idea of putting ourselves in the spotlight is something that we either forget because we're so absorbed in what we're creating, or I think in all honesty, it makes a lot of us extremely uncomfortable. I know I'm one of those people. So why do you think it's so hard for us to show up for ourselves as working creatives, like to start with?
Working creatives in who self-identify as a women, because of the patriarchy. And we're done. Welcome to my TED Talk. And so, I mean, I do think that's why I think there is a lot of socialization that's happened there. There is so many mixed messages. There's like, you're enough, you're not enough, you're too much, be quiet, or you're not talking enough. Like the messaging is just like, endless. And so that's created a real kind of clusterfuck, and I think that like in our brains, and then I think that when you become a creative, you are so focused on achieving through what you're creating. And I know because I also do personal brand photography. I've been doing that for 8 years, or brand photography. And so often those clients are people who are creatives. A lot of my clients are, counselors, therapists. I've done a lot of artists, business coaches, and they're all creative in their own right, but they've often so focused on their service. But they are the service.
They're all listeners. Like
they are the service. I even photographed a soap maker who was like, amazing soap, but never was really in the frame. And it's like, people want to know who I am, so I guess I got to do the thing. And it's like, yeah, of course, because this is why people buy local. They buy local because they want to feel like they're buying from somebody local. They can know that's not like in a sweatshop in China somewhere, right? They want to feel that connection. And that is why there's such an importance to show up there. But there's this fear, and I think we hide behind this thing that we create because we haven't been emboldened to own that space as the creative, right? We've been like, oh, I've got to make the best soap or the best, I don't know, whatever it is. For some reason, hammer just came to my mind. Maybe because I want to smash the patriarchy, but like we're so focused on that service, and especially when the service is like there isn't a product. It's like, well, you are the product in a way, right? You are the thing, and even if there is a thing that they can buy from you, people are so hungry. I think it's, with this whole buy local movement, which I believe is so important, to shop local. I mean, it creates that extra layer of depth and connection and understanding that like, oh, I'm paying $10 for this jam because I'm buying it from this family who makes it from the berries from their farm. And I got to meet them at the farmer's market. And how cool is that? And now I get to see their story, and now, I can share their website with my friends and their stories on there. And you're going to love reading about this family versus if if it's just a jam and it talks about their jam on their website. I mean, that's no different than just buying jam from the grocery store, So I think it just really creates that depth, and storytelling is the oldest like form of human creativity around. So that is just an element of storytelling. And, I don't think you have to be this wild, exuberant extrovert to want to tell your story. You can tell it in your own way, in a quiet way, in a poetic way, in a vulnerable way, in a gregarious way, like however you want. But this fear of showing up really does, I think, come from the patriarchy, and also like endless body image that's put issues that are put upon us through these like beauty standards, that we don't ever feel good enough to be seen. We
Mhm.
think our product is really good, right?
Yeah.
The thing that we're creating. We know our service is bang on,
Yep.
but we feel insecure because we ourselves may have, and probably are continually having, judgment upon us about age, about weight, about how we represent in our gender, ability, right? There's so much ableism in society, it's unreal. And the list goes on and on. So how do you overcome that? My theory is you overcome that by slowly standing in that place where you're not represented, and more people will join you.
Yes, absolutely. And that kind of brings me to the next question is like how, because I know this is a struggle for so many of us for so many reasons that we make up in our head, like why we can't step out. But what what are some words of wisdom that you have for people who know that they need to do this? They're just not sure how to go about it, or like how. I don't have anybody to take my picture. I don't have a photographer following me around. I don't know how to pose. I don't, blah, blah, blah. So what are some ways that people can kind of start to get comfortable putting themselves out there?
I think one way that you can, first of all, this is a great question. I've not been asked that. Honestly, I think just spending 5 minutes in the mirror, maybe once a week, and just looking at yourself and saying something nice to yourself, and finding something to appreciate about yourself that isn't necessarily based on your appearance, because I think we're so focused on appearance. I love my laugh. It makes people happy. Things like that, where it's like, and you might bring joy to yourself even saying that out loud. I think cultivating that self-compassion
Yeah.
is the first place to start. I tell a lot of people that I photograph, like, I cannot change the way you see yourself. It's not my job. I can't do that. I hope that I will show you something that maybe you haven't seen in a long time,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you've never seen at all. But I cannot change if you hate your nose.
Yeah.
I hope that I can show you that it's not as important as you think, because you're amazing in all these different ways. But I can't change that because all of that is in our head. So I think people are often hoping for photos to show them something that they don't see, but then often what ends up happening is then they see more of what they didn't want to see,
Mm.
because we read photographs like we read a page of words, and we instantly go to, oh, I don't like my flabby arms, because we're not even looking at the photo. We're zoning
We
into that
fixate.
spot,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you can start to like just build that self-compassion, by looking at yourself in the mirror and just saying something nice to yourself and showing appreciation to yourself, that's again not about your physical appearance, but maybe it's like, thank you, arms, for being so strong and allowing me to hold this camera up for 14 hours during a wedding, or whatever it is, where you're building that compassion and that
Mm-hmm.
appreciation for yourself and your body. I think that's a really great place to start, and to start doing selfies.
Yeah.
um, just start doing shameless selfies.
We all have a cell phone, so we all have a camera literally in our pocket, where we can do things like that. And it's a great way to just get yourself a little more comfortable in front of a. I love the mirror thing too, because that was actually something when I did. I was a drama kid in high school, and so when that was something we were constantly told to do, is like practice in front of the mirror, practice your
Okay,
monologue
yeah.
in front of the mirror, over and over again, and see what your face looks like when you are excited or when you're sad or whatever. So those mirrors can be very helpful. Mm.
I think another thing is that, I'm currently doing my embodiment coaching certification, and that was really born out of wanting to help guide people on a deeper level to connect with themselves and their
Mm-hmm.
bodies. And because we operate in our brain so much, right? We're overthinking, we're not feeling. And that this whole idea of feeling like we're moving through the world, hating ourselves, just we're becoming more and more disembodied as busy as we are, and I think that underneath that not wanting to take a photo or be in the frame, there's a lot of layers underneath that.
Oh
And
yeah.
for me, moving more into the embodiment work and doing like somatics for myself, practicing that. Now, I've never been shy in front of a camera, but there's other things that have other blocks. We all do. And as you kind of start to move through that, not therapy and trying to analyze that, but just try and feel that and connect with those blocks and release them, just honor them and be like, it's there. I don't need to analyze this. I just need to acknowledge this. And thank you so much for showing up. You're welcome to go now.
Yeah.
Politely, it's really powerful. And yeah, I've learned so much in this year so far about, you know, how we can allow ourselves to just be and how I can help guide people. Because I think, again, back to all those social structures and the patriarchy and all the messaging, and it's really hard to show up. Like I acknowledge that, like, to show up with clothes on or clothes off.
Yeah,
Because I
exactly. Just
photograph
showing
people
up.
with both, right? Yeah, it's really hard. And I think it's because there's so many layers of things that we need to clear out. And those things are usually external voices that made an impact on us along the way. I think about it a lot. I have a child, and I think about like some of the things that he's been told at school that I'm like, why would you say that to a kid? And then I meet these women that tell me these things about someone that said something to them when they were at school. And I'm
Oh
like,
my
oh my
gosh. Yeah.
gosh, like these things stick with us so
Forever.
deeply. Right.
Yes.
So there's no wonder it's hard for us to show up.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think those things stick with you more as a kid than when you get told the same thing as an adult. I don't know why. For me anyway, I know that those things that I heard between sort of the ages of 11 and 14, 15 are the things that have stuck with me more than anything
Totally.
else. And not just about
Yeah.
looks. Like I remember my grade 8 art
No.
teacher telling me that I couldn't draw and so I shouldn't waste my time. Like,
Oh,
and I'm an illustrator now. So
yeah, you
showed
know what?
her,
I've heard that one before too.
but yeah, like
I've
that.
actually heard someone tell me the same thing recently where an art teacher was like, I mean, you might as well just quit. Basically, it's
Exactly.
like,
And
well, that
it's
was
stuck
encouraging.
with me for decades
Of
before,
course it did.
and it was something I always wanted to do, but I was just like, well, I'm not good enough. So why bother? Right. And yeah, so yes, those things really stick with you. And I do think you mentioned before about why, our customers, our clients, all those people, they really want to connect with the person underneath that they're buying from. I was just reading a thread in a Facebook group that I'm in for a product selling masterclass that I'm in for people who make products. So a lot of them are not what I would consider creatives in the group, but a lot of them are. And there was this one woman, one of the first modules is about pricing your work. And this woman who had recently just joined, she was Canadian and she was really worried about, she makes Christmas ornaments. She was very worried about after going through the pricing formulas, she would have to do a massive increase in her ornaments. And she's like, I can't sell them for that much. Nobody would buy them. And the amount that she said was really, if you went into a specialty Christmas store, that's what the ornaments would start at. But for
Mm,
whatever reason, she couldn't see the value. She was comparing herself to Walmart and Costco. And there's a place for Walmart and Costco, and that's fine. But she wasn't understanding that the people who are buying from her are buying from the creative, the person who's made it. It's a handmade family heirloom ornament, and
hmm
you're putting yourself in you're putting yourself out there as Costco. And that's not who we are. And so I think there is, we talk about the intersection of business and entrepreneurship and creativity here. And I think there is like an actual business case for getting in front of the camera and letting people know who you are, because it's what connects them to you and makes them want to buy from you. And like you said, nobody thinks twice about spending $18 on something they could buy at Walmart for $8 because they've met you. They're like, okay, this woman lives down the road for me and I'm helping her send her kid to soccer practice or music classes or whatever. And she's going to turn around and buy from other people in the community. And we don't always see that. And so
No.
I think it it's actually a good business decision to get yourself out there.
Yeah. And, I love talking about money. So I love that you brought that up, because I would say to her that while the surface story is like, oh, well, that's what they charge, underneath that story, and this is where the juiciness of embodiment work comes in, there's her own story of personal worth and personal value. And like, let's unpack that, because really, once you start to kind of connect with that, then those Walmarts and all the places and dollar stores, again, yes, they have their place and they employ local people, but they start to matter less when you start to value yourself. So it's really like, you can do all the pricing calculations and someone can teach you all of that, but you have to believe it. It's the same thing with affirmations, right? People say like, oh, I will, you're taught in business all the time to do these affirmations about your business. And like, then if you instantly don't believe it, it's not going to happen. So, I think that happens a lot when it comes to pricing your products. And I see this so often that people who identify as women are not like valuing themselves, and therefore kind of dancing around that. And then they start to not show up. They start to like, they're not really pricing with integrity and in a way that will allow them to have a sustainable business, because it really isn't that what it comes down to. Like, I didn't go into business to have a nonprofit, as much as I would love to have every single woman that I meet come in and have a photo shoot with me. I know my numbers and I know what it costs me to run my business. And that's not something that consumers need to know. But back to showing up, that's how I bring that value. Right. Yeah. And so I can stand by those numbers. And sure, there's cheaper photographers. And honestly, I want to reach out to every single one of them and offer them coaching so that they can value themselves, because most of them are women who are undervaluing themselves. And I don't even feel angry about them undervaluing me, because it's not even about that. I'm not even in that same kind of, lineup, if you will. But it just breaks my heart to see how little so many women undervalue themselves and the work that they create. And I get it. When I used to work in the arts, we used to run a craft fair. I worked at the Roundhouse Community Arts Center in Vancouver, and we ran a craft fair, and I would definitely see people walking around looking at things going, oh, I couldn't make this. And I'm like, but are you going to make that? Are you going to make that? No, you're not, because you're busy, and that's rude. And I think it's like, when you start to tell your story, however you can do that in your own unique way, then I think you start to build that trust, and then people start to get connected with that. And so I don't think they're going to really be walking by being like, I can make that. They're going to be like, oh, I've been seeing this person and I'm so excited to get their thing.
Yep. It's also really fascinating to me is how as women, we're really good at seeing when other women undervalue themselves. And yet we have this really hard time telling ourselves that same thing. Like, I'm so good at this. I'm so good at telling, the women in my mastermind group and things like that, like, you're undercharging. You should be charging way more. You're way better than what you are valuing yourself. And then when it comes to me, it's like, oh no, I can't. If I do that, nobody's going to want it. Like, it just, it's hilarious in some ways. And it's also extremely frustrating because I can see myself doing it. It's maddening, but yeah.
I think we all do that at some point, right? I think it's always easier to give your friend advice. Yes. And then you kind of like slink off quietly going, oh.
I know. And it's funny how we can always see the value in our friends. Like, we see the value they bring, but we have such a hard time seeing that in ourselves.
That's the same thing with body image though. Yeah. Right. We see like, what are you so worried about stepping in front of the camera? You're gorgeous. You're beautiful. You have this amazing personality. You're blah, blah, blah. Like the laundry list goes on. But me, oh no.
I'm hideous. No, I can't.
Yeah, right. So well, I don't know if you ever heard that expression, like you should talk to yourself like you talk to others. Back to that whole standing in front of the mirror thing.
Would you have a friend who would you allow a friend to talk to you the way that you talk to yourself? No, we wouldn't. Absolutely not. And yet we do it all the time.
It's a thing.
So let's talk about a few practical things before we wrap up, because I've taken up a lot of your time here, but
it's been
so
fun.
what are some so what are some easy ways that we can be in the frame without necessarily working with a professional photographer? And I'm also referring to not just getting out in front and having like the headshot, which I think is really important for a lot of business owners, but also, I think one of the things that helps people connect with us is having photos of ourselves actually doing the thing that we do, showing ourselves absorbed in the moment. I think that can also really resonate with people. Are there some easy ways that we can do that ourselves without having to work with a professional photographer?
I mean, I think you can get a tripod for your phone. And people love process. People love behind the scenes. And behind the scenes and process are meant to be messy. So you don't have to overthink it. You don't have to redo it 20,000 times. You can just set your phone up on a tripod. You can put it on video, and you can even, as you're recording the video, you can use the videos, or you can take screenshots of the video, so it's like a photo, and start to show that kind of stuff. I think that process is so fascinating. Again, it's back to meeting the maker. Like, how do they melt down the metal to make that ring? That's so fascinating. Like, people don't have that capacity. And even drawing, right? Showing, like, because you can put your phone down. I know I'm showing you, and people can't see me, but you can put your phone down in a way that it just focuses on your hand. So like, that's that little step towards the camera where it's not your whole self. You're not being, posing pretty for the camera, like school photos. It's just showing that messy middle on the process. And I really think that starts to kind of build that, oh, wow, people actually like seeing this kind of thing.
Yeah, helps build a little bit of confidence. So when you're ready to work with a professional photographer, what are some of the things that we should look with? Because I do really think it's something we should all aspire, like try.
Yes.
I know when you're first starting out, you might not have the funds to work with a professional, but I think it's a place we all want to hopefully get to, because it can just add so much to your branding materials and for your own confidence, as we've talked about today. So what are some of the things that we should look for, and what are some of the questions that we should ask before we work with somebody?
Oh yeah, I have like a whole blog post on this.
Give us a link. We'll put it in the show notes.
Well, I've written that for both when you're hiring someone to do photos for your business, and also just for yourself, because I do think there are really key things to look for. And number one, everybody's looking for price. And while I know that price is important, you already mentioned, especially as creatives who are undervaluing themselves and maybe not quite there yet, you need to value other creatives. Like just what you said a second ago about how we don't value ourselves, but we'll like cheer our friend on. It's back to not valuing yourself. Because you're like, oh, I got to hire this photographer. And I think a lot of the times people say like, oh, I'm looking for what is affordable? Because even people with big budgets are looking for what's affordable within their budget. So I really hate that so much. And I think while I know that money is important and working within your budget is important, that should be your last thing that you consider, because I think what you really need to be considering is, what kind of work do they create? What's the experience they're going to offer? What's their process? Do they get in the frame?
Yes. That's a really good question.
Do they get in the frame? I mean, for me, that's a big thing. I really feel like I need to preach what I sell.
Yeah.
If I'm going to say, hey, come and be vulnerable with me, be it taking photos of your pottery studio or intimate portraits here in my studio, I need to show that, so I would be looking for that. I mean, of course you're looking for the style and the way that they edit. Is it dark and moody? Is it bright and airy? But that's one part of it. But I would be really curious of what are you going to do to get to know me so that my photos truly reflect me? As someone who has done brand photography for the last 8.5 years, as I said, I kind of fell into that. Just to be honest, when I first started being a photographer, I wanted to do photos for nonprofits and travel around and do that. Because again, back to that social justice warrior thing. So storytelling is like in my DNA. And when I started doing photos for business owners, they always want a photo with their laptop, and I'll take the photo with your laptop. But what does that say about you? What does it say about you that you have a laptop? Now, I think it's really fascinating that if maybe people don't associate. So I photographed my makeup artist, and people don't realize that she actually does office work. So for me, that made a lot of sense that she needed to do that, or I did a web designer and she needed to have like a lot of photos of her holding her iPad so that she could then superimpose her. That made a lot of sense. But I would want to know, what are you as a photographer going to do to help bring out my authentic personality? Because laptops are not my authentic personality. I'll tell you, you will barely ever see me with a camera in my hand because I'm a photographer. People know this about me. When I photograph people, I myself have a process where I do an intake. I have, if it were paper, it'd probably be a 3-page questionnaire, both for my brand photography and for my intimate portraits, that are asking questions so that I can like really get in there to figure out like, oh, you love to collect, I don't know, some obscure China doll, or you love donuts, or and then how can we work that into your photo shoot? Because that is where the authenticity comes out. And I think that that's what you need to look for in a photographer, beyond, are you going to move me through like your 10 top selling poses that everyone move? And you know what? Unfortunately, that's how we're trained in our industry. I don't personally work like that. So for me, I think that's a big value to someone, is like, how are you going to truly see me?
Yeah. Yes.
I think that would stump a lot of people if they ask the photographer, how are you going to
Yeah,
truly see
I was
me?
just going to say, is it okay to ask that question?
Why not? I would.
Yeah.
I'm ready to answer it. Ask me all day, any day. I'm here for it. But no, of course, like, you're hiring someone, you're paying them very good money. You're being vulnerable with them, regardless of what they're photographing. If it's your family, if it's your wedding, if it's whatever, it's like, well, how are you going to truly reflect me back at me?
Yeah.
What are you hoping to do? And will I feel comfortable? I will tell you, I even ask my clients if they have any traumas that I should know about. Because I do come from, through the training that I've had, trauma informed, and they don't need to tell me what it is, but I want to know so that I do not potentially trigger it during a photo shoot.
Yeah. And in the work you do, that would be really hugely important, I would think.
So ask all the questions. I think, honestly, people usually ask me this: how much does it cost? That's usually the first question out of the gate. And how long does it take? That's it.
Really?
That's what people ask me.
I think we're afraid to ask questions sometimes. I think we're shy, or we think we're gonna, I don't know, be rude, I think.
Yeah. Well, I have questions ready for them, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get to that. But first I want to know you. And first I want to know, have you ever been photographed?
Yeah.
Do you have a photograph of yourself that you love?
You just made such a good point. For all of us creative service providers, it is so important for us to ask questions of potential clients as well, to make sure they're the right fit. And often we forget that.
I'm not trying to skirt around the pricing thing. I'm trying to get to know this person, because you know what? It's also vulnerable for us, depending on what your service is as a creative, to engage with this person that you potentially could be spending a very long time with. One of my very good friends is a jeweler, and she makes the most amazing jewelry. You should totally have her on your podcast. And, she like melts down old jewelry, heirlooms. There's a lot of emotion attached to that, and then recreates things. And, it's like, you got to be really mindful of what you're going to create, because you're melting down all of the stuff. And she wants to know just as much as they want to know, like, do I want to spend this process, which is really emotionally heightened for a lot of people, with this person?
Yeah.
Like, we don't take, I don't know, you get to the point in your business where you don't have to take everybody. And I think the creatives out there need to know that they're just as important and as vulnerable in those situations. So when you have questions ready to ask people, rather than just jumping to price, number one, you're not selling yourself on price and competing on price. You're showing them, okay, yeah, we're going to get to that. I know that's important, but I want to know a little bit more about you. And I think right there, you're showing them that value that you bring, because you truly are bringing that value of wanting to know your client.
And they're connecting with you. So they're already bonding with you, like, before you've even talked about the money. And so important. So important. And I know when we're starting out, we have to say yes to a lot of things we don't want to do. And
I did.
Of course.
We just like, you learn
but that's how you learn.
Which is why I love talking about this stuff, because it's like, oh my gosh, if I could go back, it's like, what would I focus so hard on learning my camera. and the art of photography. And I'm a bit of a like nerd that way. I just love looking at old books and, you know, the legends of past. And really, I should just be learning about business because all that other stuff is easier to learn, to be quite honest.
It is. It's as much about psychology and all of that too at the same time. And it's, but I think we have to go through that too as part of the learning
Totally.
process.
It's like the
Knowing
rite of
what your
passage.
knowing what your red flags are, knowing how to spot them, knowing that when that feeling in your gut plays up, you need to listen to it. And
Yeah,
people can tell you over and over again not to do
totally.
certain things, but you have to make the mistake yourself. Oh, Michele, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. I have really enjoyed it. And before we sign off, where can people find you?
Okay, well, you can head over to my website, mateusstudios.com. I think you'll probably put it in the show links because no one ever knows how to spell that. And then I'm also at Mateus Studios on Instagram. And I have another Instagram as well, which is Mateus Coaching. And that's where I talk all about my coaching services that are really informed by my embodiment practices. And some of my branding photography is on there too.
Awesome. Yes. And yes, we will put all of that in the show notes for everyone that's listening. Thank you again for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show. And thank you all for listening this week. I will be back in another 2 weeks with another brand new episode, and we will talk to you all then. Thanks, Michele.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope that this conversation inspires other creatives to just step into the frame and own their value and worth.
I have a feeling that it really will. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshelookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshelookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshelookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.